1 second, you feel safe. And then,
The police are on their way.
well, you still do.
The marble countertop felt cold against my palms as I stared at the thick document Faye had just slammed down between us. 23 pages of legal text, bound in navy blue covers with gold lettering that read Postnuptial Agreement in Times New Roman font. The kitchen clock ticked past 11 p.m., its sound echoing through our oversized suburban home like a metronome counting down to something final. Sign it tonight, Alex, or I take everything. Faye's voice carried that particular edge she'd perfected over 15 years of marriage, part ice queen, part corporate shark. She stood across from me in her designer workout clothes, fresh from what she claimed was a late-night yoga session. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect ponytail that somehow never showed signs of actual exercise. I picked up the document, feeling its weight. Heavy paper, expensive binding. Someone had invested serious money in making this look official and intimidating. What exactly am I signing away this time? Nothing you haven't already lost? She tapped her manicured fingernails against the counter. Hale Trenwick drew it up. He says it's airtight. Hale Trenwick. I knew that name from the country club circuit. Old money lawyer who charged $500 an hour to tell rich wives exactly what they wanted to hear. The kind of attorney who wore suspenders unironically and still called women little lady in depositions. Put him on speaker, I said, settling into the kitchen bar stool. I want to hear this masterpiece explained properly. Faye's phone buzzed to life, and Trenwick's nasal voice filled our kitchen. Alex, good to finally speak with you. I trust Faye has explained the situation. She's explained that I'm supposed to sign away my rights to everything I've worked for over the past 20 years. I flipped through the first few pages, scanning the dense legal language. Standard boilerplate stuff. Division of assets, custody arrangements, spousal support. What's my incentive here, Hale? Your incentive is keeping this family together. Trenwick's tone suggested he was reading from notes. The alternative is a messy divorce that benefits nobody. This way, everyone knows where they stand. Everyone except me, apparently. I continued reading while Faye paced behind me, her designer sneakers squeaking against the hardwood floors. The document was thorough. I had to give Trenwick credit. He'd managed to transfer ownership of our house, my retirement accounts, and even my classic Mustang into Faye's name. The custody arrangement gave her primary residence with our 2 kids, relegating me to weekend visits and alternating holidays. This is quite comprehensive, I said, turning to page 12, though I noticed some interesting gaps in the language. What gaps? Trenwick's voice sharpened slightly. I'd spent 22 years practicing contract law before retiring to freelance investigation work. Reading legal documents was like breathing to me, and this one had the telltale signs of rushed preparation. Whoever drafted it had focused so heavily on asset division that they'd neglected some basic protective clauses. Nothing major, I lied smoothly. Just curious about the enforcement mechanisms. Faye stopped pacing and leaned against the kitchen island, arms crossed. Stop stalling, Alex. Sign the papers or don't, but decide tonight. The ultimatum hung in the air between us like smoke. 20 years of marriage, 2 children, a mortgage we'd paid down together, retirement accounts built through careful planning and sacrifice, all of it reduced to 23 pages of legal text and a signature line. I reached for the pen Trenwick had provided, a heavy Mont Blanc with gold trim. Expensive, like everything else in this charade. I'll need a few minutes to review the technical language. You have 30 minutes, Faye said, checking her phone. I have an early morning tomorrow. Another yoga session, no doubt. Or maybe Pilates. Faye had developed quite the fitness routine over the past 6 months, spending hours at that upscale gym downtown. She'd lost 15 pounds and gained a new wardrobe of athletic wear that probably cost more than most people's cars. I turned to page 18 and found what I was looking for, a section titled Modification and Amendment Procedures. The language was standard but sloppy, allowing for handwritten additions provided both parties initialed any changes. Trenwick had probably copied this from a template without thinking through the implications. Hale, just to clarify, I said, clicking the pen, any handwritten modifications need to be initialed by both parties? That's correct, though I don't anticipate any modifications being necessary. Of course not. I smiled at Faye, who was now texting someone with the focused intensity she usually reserved for work emergencies. Just being thorough. I found my spot on page 19, buried in the middle of a dense paragraph about asset valuation procedures. In small, neat handwriting, I added a single sentence. This agreement shall be rendered null and void upon documented evidence of adultery or infidelity by either party. I initialed the addition with my standard AR and slid the document across to Faye. "Your turn to initial the modification," I said. She glanced up from her phone, clearly annoyed at the interruption. "What modification?" "Just a small clarification about asset valuation, page 19, paragraph C." Faye grabbed the pen and scrawled her initials next to mine without reading the text. She was too busy typing a response to whoever had captured her attention on that phone. The message preview showed just enough for me to catch a name, Trent, and the beginning of what looked like an address. "There," she said, sliding the document back. "Anything else?" "Just my signature." I turned to the final page and signed with a flourish. "Alexander James Ryder, witness this 23rd day of October." Trenwick's voice crackled through the speaker. "Excellent. I'll file the paperwork first thing Monday morning. Faye, I'll send you copies for your records." "Perfect." Faye was already heading toward the garage door, car keys jingling in her hand. "I'm staying at Marina's tonight. We can discuss logistics tomorrow." Marina Walsh, her best friend and fellow fitness enthusiast. They'd been practically inseparable since Faye joined that gym, spending hours together planning workout routines and discussing whatever it was that occupied the minds of women who had too much time and too much money. The garage door rumbled open and Faye's BMW purred to life. I listened to her back out of the driveway and disappear down our quiet suburban street, leaving me alone with a signed postnuptial agreement and a growing suspicion that I'd just been played. But two could play that game. I walked to my home office in the basement, a converted space where I kept my investigative equipment and case files. The room was organized with military precision, filing cabinets arranged alphabetically, computer monitors displaying various databases and search engines, and a wall-mounted board where I tracked ongoing cases with colored pins and string like something out of a detective movie. Tonight, I had a new case to add to the board, my own marriage. I pinned up a photo of Faye and wrote "Subject" underneath in red marker. Next to it, I added a timeline of her behavior changes over the past 6 months, the sudden fitness obsession, the new clothes, the mysterious late-night outings, and now this postnuptial agreement that felt more like a preemptive strike than a mutual understanding. The evidence was circumstantial, but compelling. Faye was planning something, and she'd made the mistake of assuming I was too trusting or too stupid to figure it out. She'd married a contract lawyer and somehow forgotten that reading the fine print was literally my job. I opened my laptop and began documenting everything I could remember about her recent behavior. The nights she came home late smelling like expensive cologne that wasn't mine. The phone calls she took in private, speaking in hushed tones about scheduling conflicts and availability windows. The credit card charges at restaurants I'd never been to and hotels in our own city. By 3 a.m., I had the beginnings of a comprehensive file, but documentation was only the first step. If Faye was planning to destroy our marriage and take everything I'd worked for, she was going to discover that underestimating Alexander Ryder was the biggest mistake of her life. I pulled out a fresh legal pad and began making a list of everything I'd need to prove my suspicions. Phone records, credit card statements, GPS tracking data from her car, and most importantly, photographic evidence of whatever she was doing during those mysterious fitness sessions. 22 years of practicing law had taught me that the best defense was a good offense, and if Faye wanted to play hardball with legal documents and ultimatums, she was about to learn that I'd been playing that game since before she knew the difference between a contract and a receipt. The postnuptial agreement sat on my desk like a loaded weapon. She thought she'd cornered me into signing away my rights and my future. Instead, she just handed me the key to destroying her entire plan. Some people never learn to read the fine print, and some people never learn that the quiet ones are usually the most dangerous. Monday morning arrived with the kind of gray October drizzle that made everything look like a noir film. I sat in my kitchen, drinking coffee and watching Faye prepare for another day at her public relations firm. She moved through our morning routine with mechanical precision: Greek yogurt with berries, green smoothie, designer workout clothes packed in a leather gym bag that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "I'll be late tonight," she said, without looking up from her phone. "Client dinner." "Which client?" "The Morrison Group, that tech startup I mentioned." She grabbed her keys and headed for the garage. "Don't wait up." The Morrison Group. I made a mental note to verify that particular detail later. In my experience, the lies people told were often more revealing than the truths they tried to hide. After Faye left, I spent an hour setting up surveillance equipment throughout the house. Nothing illegal or invasive, just basic security cameras in common areas and a GPS tracker on the BMW. Both items were readily available online and perfectly legal for a homeowner to install on his own property and vehicles. My phone rang at 9:30. Jules Brennan, the only friend I'd managed to keep through 15 years of marriage to a woman who considered most of my associates beneath our social status. "Alex, you sound like hell," Jules said. His voice carried the gravelly tone of someone who'd spent 20 years as a police detective before retiring to run a downtown bar called The Anchor. "Everything all right?" "Domestic situation," I said, which was technically accurate. "I might need some professional consultation." "The kind of consultation that requires bourbon, or the kind that requires bail money?" "Hopefully just bourbon." I grabbed my jacket and keys. "Are you free this morning?" "For you?" "Always. Come by around 11. I'll put on a fresh pot of coffee." The Anchor occupied the ground floor of a converted warehouse in the Arts District, the kind of neighborhood that had been dangerous 20 years ago and was now populated by craft breweries and vintage clothing stores. Jules had bought the building for almost nothing during the recession and turned it into exactly the kind of bar where off-duty cops and retired investigators came to drink away their cynicism. I found him behind the bar, polishing glasses with the methodical attention of someone who understood that details mattered. Jules was in his early 60s, built like a linebacker who'd stayed in shape, with steel gray hair and the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd seen everything at least twice. "You look terrible," he said, pouring 2 cups of coffee from a pot that smelled like it could wake the deceased. "When's the last time you slept?" "Saturday." I settled onto a bar stool and accepted the coffee gratefully. Faye presented me with a postnuptial agreement last night. "Sign it or she takes everything." Jules raised an eyebrow. "And you signed it?" "I signed it." I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos I'd taken of the document. "But I added a little clause she didn't bother reading." He studied the screen, squinting at the small text. "Voided upon evidence of adultery. Nice touch. You think she's cheating?" "I think she's planning something that requires me to be financially and legally powerless." I scrolled through the photos, showing him the asset division and custody arrangements. "This document doesn't protect a marriage. It ends one." "So, what do you need from me?" "Background information. Faye's been spending a lot of time at some upscale gym downtown. Elite Fitness on Harbor Street. I want to know who else works out there." Jules pulled out his own phone and began typing. His network of contacts throughout the city was legendary. Cops, bartenders, security guards, and various other people who made their living watching other people's business. "Elite Fitness," he murmured, scrolling through what looked like a contact list. "Yeah, I know that place. Expensive membership, attracts a lot of trophy wives and corporate types. My buddy Rick does security there on weekends." "Can you get me information about the staff, particularly the personal trainers?" "Probably. What kind of information?" "Names, backgrounds, any history of getting involved with married clients." I finished my coffee and pushed the cup across the bar. "And I'll need it quietly." Jules nodded. "Give me until tomorrow. Rick owes me a favor, and he's got access to employee records." I spent the rest of the morning driving around the city, familiarizing myself with Faye's usual routes and hangouts. The gym was located in a converted warehouse similar to Jules's bar, but upscale in the way that only expensive renovation could achieve. Floor-to-ceiling windows, exposed brick walls, and a parking lot full of luxury vehicles. I parked across the street and settled in to observe. Over the course of 2 hours, I watched a steady stream of well-dressed women enter and exit the building. Most were in their 30s and 40s, driving cars that suggested either successful careers or successful marriages. The kind of clientele that could afford $100 workout sessions and designer athletic wear. At 12:30, Faye's BMW pulled into the parking lot. She emerged wearing black yoga pants and a fitted tank top, carrying that expensive leather gym bag. But instead of heading directly into the building, she waited by her car, checking her phone repeatedly. 5 minutes later, a red Jeep Wrangler pulled up beside her. The driver was a man in his early 30s, muscular in the way that suggested either manual labor or professional fitness training. He had dark hair, a carefully maintained beard, and the kind of confident smile that probably worked well on lonely housewives. Faye approached the Jeep and leaned against the driver's side window. Their conversation lasted maybe 3 minutes, but their body language told a story that didn't require audio. The way she touched his arm, the way he looked at her, the way they both glanced around to make sure nobody was watching. I took photos with a telephoto lens, capturing their interaction from multiple angles. Not conclusive evidence of anything beyond a friendly conversation, but suggestive enough to warrant further investigation. They entered the gym separately, maintaining a careful distance that suggested practiced discretion. I waited another hour, but they didn't emerge together. Either they were being extremely cautious, or their relationship was still in the early stages of development. My phone buzzed with a text from Faye. "Dinner running late. Don't wait up." It was 2:15 in the afternoon. Either the Morrison group had very unusual dining schedules, or Faye was establishing an alibi for something that hadn't happened yet. I drove home and spent the afternoon reviewing security footage from our house cameras. The system I'd installed was motion activated and stored everything in cloud storage, accessible from my phone or computer. Most of the footage was routine. Faye getting ready for work, coming and going at normal hours, nothing particularly suspicious. But when I reviewed the previous week's recordings, I found something interesting. On Wednesday night, Faye had returned home at 11:30, parked in the garage, and then immediately left again on foot. The cameras showed her walking down our street toward the main road, but she disappeared from view after about 50 yards. She'd returned 2 hours later, again on foot, and retrieved her car from the garage. The timestamp showed she'd been gone from 11:45 p.m. until 1:50 a.m. Almost 2.5 hours unaccounted for, with no explanation for why she'd left her car at home. I cross-referenced that time frame with her credit card statements, which I could access through our joint banking account. No charges during those hours, which meant either she'd paid cash for whatever she was doing or someone else had paid for her. The pattern was becoming clearer. Faye wasn't just having an affair. She was having a carefully planned affair with someone who understood operational security, the kind of person who knew how to avoid leaving electronic trails and paper evidence. My phone rang at 6 p.m. Jules, calling with preliminary information. "Your wife's got interesting taste in fitness instructors," he said without preamble. "The guy you're probably looking for is Trent Voss. 29 years old, been working at Elite Fitness for about 8 months. Personal trainer, specializes in holistic wellness coaching for female clients. Background? Clean record, but Rick says he's got a reputation around the gym. Likes to get very personal with his coaching, if you know what I mean. Divorced about a year ago, ex-wife claimed he was cheating throughout their marriage. With clients? Among others. Rick says management knows about his extracurricular activities but looks the other way because he brings in a lot of high-paying customers. Rich wives love a trainer who makes them feel special." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger exactly, but a kind of calculating fury that I recognized from my courtroom days. The feeling I got when an opposing attorney made a mistake that would cost their client everything. "I need more information about Trent Voss," I said. "Address, vehicle registration, financial records if possible." "How deep do you want to go with this?" "As deep as necessary." I walked to my office window and looked out at our perfectly manicured suburban street. Faye thinks she can destroy 20 years of marriage and take everything I've worked for. She's about to learn that some games have consequences. Jules was quiet for a moment. "Alex, I've seen a lot of domestic situations go sideways. You sure you want to go down this road?" "She already took me down this road," I said. "I'm just deciding how far to walk." After hanging up, I returned to my surveillance equipment and began planning the next phase of my investigation. If Faye and Trent Voss thought they were being careful, they were about to discover that careful wasn't nearly enough when you were dealing with someone who understood exactly how to document infidelity for legal purposes. The postnuptial agreement sat in my desk drawer like a loaded weapon. Faye had handed me the ammunition to destroy her entire plan, and she didn't even know it yet. Some people never learned to read the fine print. And some people never learned that the quiet ones were the most dangerous opponents of all. Tuesday morning brought unseasonably warm weather and the kind of clarity that comes from a full night's sleep and a clear plan of action. I woke up at 5 a.m., made coffee, and reviewed the surveillance footage from Monday evening. Faye had returned home at 11:45 p.m., exactly as she'd predicted, looking slightly disheveled and carrying her gym bag. The Morrison Group's website showed no record of any client dinner on Monday night. Their social media accounts were similarly quiet, with no posts about evening events or business meetings. Either Faye had attended the most secretive corporate dinner in history, or she'd spent the evening somewhere else entirely. My phone buzzed with a text from Jules. "Meet me at the Anchor at 9 a.m. Bring your camera." I arrived to find him waiting with a manila folder and a cup of coffee that could probably dissolve paint. "Trent Voss," he said, sliding the folder across the table. "Everything my guy could dig up without breaking any major laws." The file was comprehensive. Vehicle registration for a red 2019 Jeep Wrangler, a license plate number, home address in a luxury apartment complex downtown. Financial records showed he was living well beyond what a personal trainer should reasonably afford. Monthly rent of $3,000, credit card charges at expensive restaurants and hotels, a lifestyle that suggested either family money or supplemental income. "His ex-wife might be worth talking to," Jules said, pointing to a page near the back of the file. "Rebecca Voss divorced him last year. Rick says she caught him cheating with at least 3 different women, including 2 of his clients. Where can I find her?" "She works at that new boutique hotel downtown, the Meridian, front desk manager." I studied the photographs Jules had included. Surveillance shots from the gym's parking lot. showing Trent with various female clients. The images were professionally taken, probably by someone with law enforcement training. In several photos, Trent was clearly engaged in conversations that looked more personal than professional. "Your wife's not his first married client," Jules observed, "and she probably won't be his last. Unless someone puts a stop to his business model. What are you thinking?" I closed the folder and finished my coffee. "I'm thinking it's time to document some evidence that will hold up in court." The Meridian Hotel occupied a converted bank building in the financial district, all marble floors and crystal chandeliers designed to impress business travelers with expense accounts. I found Rebecca Voss behind the front desk, a woman in her early 30s with auburn hair and the kind of professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mrs. Voss, I'm Alex Ryder." I handed her my business card, which identified me as a private investigator. "I'd like to speak with you about your ex-husband." Her smile disappeared entirely. "What has Trent done now?" "I believe he's involved with my wife. I'm gathering information for divorce proceedings." Rebecca glanced around the lobby, then gestured toward a quiet seating area near the elevators. "I have 10 minutes before my next meeting." We settled into leather chairs that probably cost more than most people's cars. Rebecca folded her hands in her lap and studied me with the expression of someone who'd heard this story before. "How long have they been seeing each other?" she asked. "I suspect about 6 months, but I'm still gathering evidence." "Then you're further along than I was." She laughed bitterly. "I didn't figure it out until I found hotel receipts in his gym bag. 3 different women, all clients, all married to men with money." "He has a pattern?" "Trent has a business plan. He targets unhappy wives with wealthy husbands, makes them feel special and desired, then gradually works his way into their finances. My divorce lawyer called it a romance scam, but it's perfectly legal as long as the women are willing participants." I took notes while she spoke, documenting everything she was willing to share. According to Rebecca, Trent had been running variations of this scheme for years, moving from gym to gym whenever his reputation caught up with him. "He's not just cheating," she continued. "He's building a client base of women who pay him for personal training, life coaching, and whatever else they think they're buying. Some of them give him money directly, others help him with rent, car payments, expensive dinners." "Did you keep any evidence from your divorce?" "Everything." She pulled out her phone and scrolled through what looked like an extensive photo gallery. Hotel receipts, text messages, bank statements showing unexplained deposits. My lawyer made me document everything. "Would you be willing to share that information?" Rebecca studied me for a long moment. "If it helps stop him from doing this to other women, absolutely." She spent the next few minutes forwarding files to my phone. Screenshots of text conversations between Trent and his various clients, photos of gifts they'd given him, bank records showing cash deposits that coincided with his personal training sessions. The evidence was overwhelming. Trent Voss wasn't just a cheating husband, he was running a sophisticated operation designed to extract money from lonely wives while maintaining plausible deniability about the true nature of their relationships. "There's something else," Rebecca said as I prepared to leave. "Trent keeps detailed records of his clients. Names, addresses, personal information, even photos. He stores everything in a cloud account that he thinks is secure." "How do you know about that?" "Because he used to show me pictures of the women he was training. Said it helped him develop personalized fitness programs." She shook her head. I was too trusting to realize what I was really looking at. I thanked Rebecca and left the hotel with enough evidence to destroy Trent's operation and probably his life. But I needed more than just background information. I needed current, documented proof of his relationship with Faye. That evening, I positioned myself across from Elite Fitness with a telephoto lens and unlimited patience. Faye's BMW arrived at 7:15 p.m., followed 10 minutes later by Trent's Jeep. This time, they didn't bother with the pretense of arriving separately. I watched them enter the gym together, Trent's hand resting on the small of Faye's back in a gesture that was clearly familiar and intimate. They emerged 90 minutes later, both looking like they'd spent more time talking than exercising. But instead of leaving separately, they walked to Trent's Jeep together. Faye got into the passenger seat, and they drove off toward downtown. I followed at a discreet distance, my dashboard camera recording everything. They ended up at the Riverside Inn, a boutique hotel that catered to couples seeking privacy and discretion. Trent handed his keys to the valet while Faye waited in the lobby, both of them moving with the confidence of people following a familiar routine. I parked across the street and settled in to wait. They emerged 3 hours later, looking satisfied and relaxed. Faye checked her phone repeatedly while Trent retrieved his vehicle, probably calculating how long it would take her to get home and establish her alibi. The drive back to Elite Fitness took 15 minutes. Faye retrieved her BMW and headed home while Trent drove in the opposite direction toward his apartment complex. I followed Faye, documenting her arrival time and the condition of her appearance. She walked into our house at 11:30 p.m., exactly when she'd predicted that morning. Her hair was freshly styled, her makeup had been reapplied, and she moved with the careful precision of someone executing a well-rehearsed performance. "How was the client dinner?" I asked from the kitchen, where I'd been waiting with a glass of wine and a casual expression. "Exhausting," she said without looking at me. The Morrison Group has very specific requirements for their publicity campaign. "I'm sure they do." I finished my wine and headed toward the stairs. "I'm going to bed. Try not to wake me when you come up." "I'll be up in a few minutes. Just need to respond to some emails." I climbed the stairs and went through the motions of preparing for bed, but I was far from tired. Instead, I returned to my office and spent the next 2 hours organizing the evidence I'd collected: photos of Faye and Trent together, timestamps documenting their movements, hotel records that could be subpoenaed if necessary. The case was building itself. Every lie Faye told, every alibi she constructed, every moment she spent with Trent Voss was creating a paper trail that would be impossible to explain away in court. But I wasn't ready to spring the trap yet. The postnuptial agreement required documented evidence of adultery. And while I had strong circumstantial evidence, I needed something more definitive, something that would leave no room for interpretation or legal maneuvering. I opened my laptop and began researching private investigation techniques for documenting marital infidelity. The internet was full of advice, most of it either illegal or impractical. But I found several legitimate approaches that would provide the kind of evidence that courts actually accepted. Audio recordings were problematic due to privacy laws, but photographic evidence taken in public spaces was generally admissible. Financial records showing unexplained expenses or gifts could demonstrate the exchange of money or valuable items. Phone records could establish patterns of communication that supported claims of intimate relationships. Most importantly, I needed to document not just the affair itself, but the financial impact on our marriage. If Faye was using marital assets to support her relationship with Trent, paying for hotels, dinners, or gifts, that would constitute a breach of fiduciary duty that could affect the division of assets in divorce proceedings. I spent the rest of the night creating a comprehensive surveillance plan. Over the next 2 weeks, I would document every aspect of Faye's relationship with Trent Voss: their meetings, their communications, their financial transactions, and most importantly, their underestimation of exactly who they were dealing with. By the time I finally went to bed at 4 a.m., I had a complete strategy for destroying both of their lives. They thought they were playing a game with a naive husband who would quietly accept whatever they decided to do to him. They were about to learn that some games have consequences that extend far beyond what the players originally imagined. 2 weeks of surveillance had given me enough evidence to end 3 marriages and probably several careers. Faye and Trent had settled into a routine that was both predictable and incriminating: Tuesday and Thursday evenings at the Riverside Inn, Saturday afternoons at his apartment, and Sunday morning yoga sessions that involved considerably more flexibility than any exercise program required. The financial records were particularly damaging. Faye had been using our joint credit card to pay for hotel rooms, expensive dinners, and even a weekend trip to a spa resort in Napa Valley. The total came to over $18,000 in marital funds spent on her affair, which would constitute a clear breach of fiduciary duty under California law. But the most interesting discovery came from an unexpected source. Rebecca Voss had been busy conducting her own investigation into her ex-husband's activities, and she'd uncovered something that would make my revenge considerably more comprehensive. "Trent's been filing false tax returns," she told me during our second meeting at the Meridian. "All that cash he's getting from his clients? He's not reporting it as income." She showed me copies of bank statements that documented regular cash deposits totaling over $60,000 per year, money that didn't appear on Trent's tax filings or business records. The IRS took a very dim view of unreported income, especially when it could be tied to what amounted to a commercial enterprise. "How did you get access to his bank records?" "We had joint accounts during the divorce proceedings. My lawyer subpoenaed everything, and I kept copies." Rebecca smiled grimly. "I've been waiting for the right opportunity to share this information with the appropriate authorities." "What kind of authorities?" "The IRS, for starters, but also the state licensing board for personal trainers, and possibly the district attorney's office if they're interested in investigating what amounts to a prostitution ring disguised as fitness coaching." The implications were staggering. Trent wasn't just cheating with married women. He was running an unlicensed business that involved tax evasion and possibly solicitation. If the authorities decided to investigate, they would discover a network of wealthy women who had been paying for services that went well beyond personal training. I want to coordinate our efforts, I told Rebecca. When I spring my trap, it should destroy both of their lives simultaneously. What did you have in mind? I outlined my plan over coffee that had probably been brewed sometime during the previous century. The timing would be crucial. I needed to gather the final pieces of evidence while simultaneously positioning myself to file the legal documents that would trigger the postnuptial agreement's adultery clause. I'll need 1 more week to get everything in place, I said. Can you wait that long before contacting the authorities? I've been waiting a year for this opportunity. 1 more week won't matter. That evening, I implemented the final phase of my surveillance operation. Using equipment I'd purchased from a company that specialized in corporate security, I installed a GPS tracker on Trent's Jeep and positioned a motion-activated camera in the parking lot of his apartment complex. The camera was disguised as a utility box and positioned to capture anyone entering or leaving the building, completely legal since it was focused on public areas, but sophisticated enough to provide clear images even in low-light conditions. Within 3 days, I had photographic evidence of Faye entering Trent's apartment building on multiple occasions. The timestamps correlated perfectly with her claimed whereabouts, client meetings, gym sessions, and various other alibis that were now demonstrably false. But the most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source. Faye had been careless with her phone, leaving it unlocked while she showered after one of her alleged workout sessions. I spent 10 minutes photographing her text conversations with Trent, including several that were explicitly intimate and others that discussed their plans for a future together. The texts revealed that they'd been planning this for months. Trent had advised Faye on the postnuptial agreement, suggesting specific language that would maximize her financial position while minimizing her legal exposure. They'd even discussed strategies for provoking me into signing the document without reading it carefully. "He's so trusting," Faye had written. "Still thinks we're happily married." "Won't be trusting much longer," Trent had replied. "Once the postnup is filed, you can dump him and keep everything." They had no idea that their entire plan depended on a document that I'd already sabotaged. The postnuptial agreement was sitting in Hale Trenwick's office like a time bomb, waiting for me to provide the evidence that would trigger its self-destruction clause. On Friday morning, I made copies of everything I'd collected. Photographs, financial records, text messages, hotel receipts, and a detailed timeline of Faye's activities over the past 6 months. One set went into a safety deposit box at my bank, another went to my own attorney, and a third went into a sealed envelope that I would deliver personally when the time was right. That afternoon, I called Hale Trenwick's office and scheduled a meeting for the following Monday. "What's the nature of your business?" his secretary asked. "I have some additional documentation related to the postnuptial agreement I signed last month. Mr. Trenwick will want to review it before filing the final paperwork." "I'll put you down for 10 a.m. on Monday." Perfect. That would give me the weekend to implement the final phase of my plan. Saturday morning, I followed Faye to her usual rendezvous with Trent at Elite Fitness, but instead of conducting surveillance from a distance, I decided it was time for a more direct approach. I waited until they had been inside for 30 minutes, then walked into the gym's lobby. The receptionist was a young woman with the kind of aggressively cheerful demeanor that suggested either genuine enthusiasm or pharmaceutical enhancement. "I'd like to speak with the manager," I said, presenting my business card. "I'm conducting a background investigation that may involve one of your employees." The manager was a middle-aged man named Davidson, who looked like he'd spent more time behind a desk than in a gym. He ushered me into his office with the nervous energy of someone who suspected bad news was coming. "What kind of investigation?" he asked. "I'm documenting evidence of an extramarital affair between one of your trainers and my wife. The relationship has involved the misuse of marital funds and may constitute grounds for legal action against both parties." Davidson's face went pale. "Which trainer?" "Trent Voss." "Oh." Davidson rubbed his forehead like he was trying to ward off a headache. "We've had some concerns about Mr. Voss's professional boundaries with female clients." "What kind of concerns?" "Nothing we could prove, but several clients have made comments about his training methods being very personal. And we've noticed that his most loyal clients tend to be married women with significant disposable income." I showed Davidson several photographs of Faye and Trent together, including images of them leaving the hotel and entering his apartment building. "This is the kind of personal training he's been providing." "Jesus." Davidson studied the photos with the expression of someone watching a car accident in slow motion. "This could destroy our reputation. It could destroy more than that. I have evidence suggesting that Mr. Voss has been receiving unreported cash payments from multiple clients in exchange for services that go well beyond fitness coaching." Davidson was quiet for a long moment, probably calculating the legal and financial implications of having an employee who was essentially running a prostitution ring out of his gym. "What do you want from me?" he finally asked. "I want you to terminate Trent Voss immediately. and I want you to provide me with records of all payments he's received from clients over the past year. I can fire him, but I can't give you financial records without a subpoena. Then I suggest you consult with your attorney about how to minimize your liability when this becomes a criminal investigation. I left Davidson with copies of the most damaging photographs and a business card for Rebecca Voss, who would be happy to discuss her ex-husband's business practices with anyone who was interested in limiting their legal exposure. By Monday morning, Trent would be unemployed and facing questions from both his employer and potentially law enforcement. Faye would be dealing with the social embarrassment of having her affair exposed to the staff and management of her favorite gym, but that was just the beginning. Monday at 10 a.m., I walked into Hale Trenwick's law office carrying a briefcase full of evidence and a smile that probably looked more predatory than friendly. Trenwick's office was decorated in the style of someone who wanted visitors to know exactly how much money he charged per hour. Leather-bound law books, expensive artwork, and a desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of mahogany. "Alex, good to see you again." Trenwick stood up and extended his hand with the confidence of someone who believed he held all the cards. "I understand you have some additional documentation for the postnuptial agreement?" "I do indeed." I opened my briefcase and began arranging photographs on his desk. "I think you'll find these quite illuminating." Trenwick's expression changed as he recognized what he was looking at. Photos of Faye and Trent at the hotel, entering his apartment, kissing in the gym parking lot, and engaging in behavior that was clearly intimate and ongoing. "What is this?" he asked, though his voice suggested he already knew. "This is documented evidence of adultery by my wife, as required by the modification I added to the postnuptial agreement." I pulled out a copy of the document and pointed to the clause I'd inserted. Page 19, paragraph C. "The agreement is null and void upon evidence of infidelity by either party." Trenwick picked up the document and read the clause carefully, his face growing paler with each word. "You added this language after I drafted the agreement." "I added this language before signing the agreement, with proper initials from both parties as required by your own modification procedures." I smiled. "You might want to review your template documents more carefully in the future." This changes everything." "It certainly does. The postnuptial agreement is void, which means the original prenuptial agreement remains in effect, and that document, as you'll recall, contains a very specific adultery clause that awards me 100% of marital assets in the event of infidelity by my wife." Trenwick was staring at the photographs like they might spontaneously combust. "Alex, perhaps we can work out some kind of arrangement." "The only arrangement I'm interested in is the complete and immediate implementation of the original prenuptial agreement's asset division." I began putting the photographs back into my briefcase. "I'll expect the paperwork to be filed by close of business today." "And if I refuse?" "Then I'll file it myself, along with a complaint to the state bar about an attorney who failed to properly review legal documents before advising his client to sign them." I stood up and straightened my tie. "I'm sure your malpractice insurance company would be very interested in that conversation." Trenwick was quiet for a long moment, probably calculating the cost of fighting a battle he'd already lost. "I'll need time to review the implications." "You have until 5 p.m. today. After that, I'll assume you're no longer representing my wife's interests, and I'll proceed accordingly." I left Trenwick's office and drove directly to the courthouse, where I filed a petition for divorce based on adultery and breach of fiduciary duty. The filing included a complete inventory of marital assets, documentation of Faye's misuse of joint funds, and a request for immediate temporary orders, protecting all bank accounts and investments. By the time Faye received her copy of the divorce papers, her access to our joint accounts would be frozen, her credit cards would be canceled, and her comfortable lifestyle would be reduced to whatever money she had in her personal checking account. The trap had finally sprung, and the prey was about to discover exactly how much trouble they were in. The process server found Faye at Elite Fitness on Tuesday afternoon, delivering the divorce papers in front of a lobby full of her fellow fitness enthusiasts and social climbers. According to my contact at the serving company, she'd turned several interesting shades of pale before locking herself in the women's locker room for 20 minutes. Trent had been served simultaneously at his apartment, along with a separate lawsuit for alienation of affection and intentional interference with marital relations. Both documents included selected photographs from my surveillance operation, ensuring that anyone who saw the papers would understand exactly what kind of behavior had triggered the legal action. My phone started ringing at 4:30 p.m. Faye, calling from what sounded like her car. "Alex, we need to talk." "I believe that's what lawyers are for," I replied calmly. "Though you might want to find new representation, since Hale Trenwick has a rather significant conflict of interest now." "This is insane. You can't just destroy our marriage over a misunderstanding." "I'm not destroying our marriage, Faye. You already did that. I'm just documenting the wreckage for legal purposes." She was quiet for a moment, probably trying to process the implications of what was happening. "The postnuptial agreement is void, as clearly stated in the clause I added before signing it, the clause you initialed without reading." I was sitting in my office, looking at the framed copy of the document I'd hung on the wall like a trophy. "You might want to be more careful about signing legal documents in the future. You tricked me." I added a standard protection clause to a legal document, using the modification procedures that your own lawyer included in the agreement. If that constitutes trickery, then every contract attorney in the country is guilty of the same thing. Faye hung up without saying goodbye, which was probably the most honest communication we'd had in months. An hour later, my attorney called with an update on the court proceedings. "The judge granted your request for temporary orders," Jennifer Martinez said. She was one of the best family law attorneys in the city, with a reputation for aggressive representation and an encyclopedic knowledge of divorce law. "All joint accounts are frozen, credit cards are canceled, and your wife's access to marital assets is suspended pending the outcome of the proceedings." "What about the house?" "You have exclusive use and occupancy. Your wife has been ordered to remove her personal belongings within 72 hours, but she can't take anything that could be considered marital property." "And the custody arrangements?" "Temporary custody goes to you, with supervised visitation for your wife pending a full evaluation. The judge was not impressed by the evidence of her using marital funds to support an extramarital relationship." I felt something that might have been satisfaction, but it was tempered by the knowledge that this was just the beginning of what would probably be a lengthy and expensive process. "How long before we get to trial?" 6 to 8 months, assuming your wife doesn't try to drag it out with procedural challenges. But honestly, Alex, I don't think this will go to trial. The evidence you've provided is overwhelming, and her legal position is essentially hopeless." That evening, I received an unexpected visitor, Trent Voss, standing on my front porch with the kind of desperate expression that suggested his world was falling apart in real time. "We need to talk," he said when I opened the door. "I don't think we have anything to discuss. Look, I know you're angry, but this whole thing has gotten out of hand. Maybe we can work something out." I stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind me, not wanting this conversation to take place where my children might overhear it. "What exactly did you have in mind?" "Faye and it wasn't serious. Just a casual thing, you know? She was lonely, I was available, nobody was supposed to get hurt." "Nobody was supposed to get caught, you mean?" Trent shifted uncomfortably, probably realizing that his usual charm wasn't going to work in this situation. "I'll end it, completely. Never see her again. Just call off the lawyers, okay? It's a little late for that." I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo of the two of them entering the Riverside Inn. "You've been conducting this casual thing for 6 months, using my money to pay for hotels and dinners and whatever else you thought you were entitled to. I never asked her to pay for anything. But you didn't refuse when she offered, did you?" I scrolled through more photos, showing him the evidence I'd collected of their relationship. $18,000 in marital funds, Trent. That's not casual, that's theft. His face went pale as he realized the scope of what I'd documented. "Jesus, you've been watching us for months. I've been protecting my interests, something you should have considered before you decided to target my wife." "Target?" Trent's voice cracked slightly. "It wasn't like that. We just connected. You connected with a married woman who had access to significant financial resources, and you systematically exploited that connection for your own benefit. In some jurisdictions, that's called fraud." I could see him calculating the implications, probably trying to figure out how much legal trouble he was actually facing. The alienation of affection lawsuit was just the beginning. If the district attorney decided to investigate his business practices, he could be looking at charges related to tax evasion, unlicensed business operations, and possibly solicitation. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "I want you to disappear. Leave town, find a new gym, start over somewhere else. And I want you to stay away from my wife, my children, and anyone else connected to my family. And if I do that, then I might be persuaded to limit my legal action to the divorce proceedings. But if I see you anywhere near my family again, I'll make it my personal mission to destroy every aspect of your life." Trent nodded quickly, probably relieved that I wasn't demanding something worse. "I'll be gone by the weekend." "See that you are." I watched him drive away in his red Jeep, knowing that he'd probably keep his word about leaving town. Men like Trent Voss were predators, but they were also cowards. When faced with real consequences for their actions, they usually chose the path of least resistance. The next morning brought news that my revenge was spreading beyond its original targets. Rebecca Voss called to inform me that the IRS had opened an investigation into Trent's unreported income based on information she'd provided about his cash transactions with various clients. They're very interested in his business model, she said with obvious satisfaction. Apparently, several other women have come forward with similar stories about paying him for services that went well beyond personal training. How many women? At least 6 that I know of, probably more. The IRS agent I spoke with said this could be a significant case if they can prove systematic tax evasion. The implications were staggering. If Trent had been running this operation for years, the amount of unreported income could reach into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. The penalties and interest alone would probably bankrupt him, assuming he didn't face criminal charges. There's something else, Rebecca continued. Elite Fitness fired him yesterday and they're cooperating with the investigation. Apparently they're concerned about their own liability if it turns out they were facilitating what amounts to a prostitution ring. I felt a grim satisfaction at the news. Trent's entire world was collapsing, just as he'd planned for mine to collapse. The difference was that I'd been smart enough to read the fine print before signing anything. That afternoon, I received a call from an attorney I didn't recognize. Mr. Ryder, this is Patricia Blackwood from Blackwood & Associates. I'm calling on behalf of your wife. Blackwood & Associates, one of the most expensive law firms in the city, specializing in high-stakes divorce cases and complex litigation. If Faye had hired them, she was preparing for a serious fight. What can I do for you, Ms. Blackwood? I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss a possible settlement of your divorce proceedings. My client is interested in resolving this matter without the expense and publicity of a trial. I'm listening. Would Thursday at 2 p.m. work for you? My office downtown. I'll be there. After hanging up, I called Jennifer Martinez to discuss strategy. Blackwood is good, she said. Expensive, but good. If Faye hired her, it means she's finally taking this seriously. What kind of settlement do you think they'll offer? Probably something close to 50-50 division of assets, with joint custody and no admission of wrongdoing. Standard stuff for a case where the evidence is overwhelming, but the defendant has good representation. And what should I counter with? Everything. The prenuptial agreement's adultery clause is clear, and your evidence of financial misconduct is solid. You're entitled to 100% of marital assets, plus reimbursement for the money she spent on her affair. Thursday's meeting took place in a conference room that probably cost more per hour than most people made in a week. Patricia Blackwood was a woman in her 50s with silver hair and the kind of commanding presence that suggested she'd won more battles than she'd lost. Faye sat beside her, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I'd seen her in years. The confident woman who'd slammed the postnuptial agreement onto our kitchen counter had been replaced by someone who clearly understood that her world was falling apart. Mr. Ryder, Blackwood began, my client would like to propose a settlement that's fair to both parties. I'm listening. 50-50 division of all marital assets, joint custody of the children, and a mutual non-disclosure agreement regarding the circumstances of the divorce. I pretended to consider the offer for about 10 seconds. Counter-proposal. I keep everything, as specified in the prenuptial agreement's adultery clause. Your client gets whatever she can carry in a suitcase. Blackwood's expression didn't change, but I could see Faye flinch at the bluntness of my response. Mr. Ryder, that's hardly reasonable. What's unreasonable is your client using $18,000 in marital funds to support her affair, then trying to trick me into signing a postnuptial agreement that would have given her everything I've worked for. I pulled out a folder containing copies of my evidence. This is documented theft, Ms. Blackwood. In some jurisdictions, it would be grounds for criminal charges. Faye finally spoke up. Alex, please, we can work this out. We already worked it out. You signed a postnuptial agreement with a voiding clause. I documented your adultery, and now the original prenup is back in effect. I stood up and straightened my tie. The only thing left to work out is whether you want to settle quickly or drag this through the courts for the next year. The children? Faye started. Will be fine. They're living with their father in the house they grew up in, attending the same schools, maintaining the same routines. The only thing that's changed is that their mother decided to prioritize her personal trainer over her family. I left the meeting knowing that Faye would probably accept some version of my terms within a few weeks. Her legal position was hopeless, her financial resources were limited, and her reputation was already damaged beyond repair. The trap had worked exactly as I'd planned it. She'd underestimated me, and now she was paying the price for that mistake. Some people never learned to read the fine print, and some people never learned that the quiet ones were usually the most dangerous opponents of all. 3 weeks after the disastrous settlement meeting, Patricia Blackwood called to inform me that her client was prepared to accept my terms. Faye would receive a token settlement of $50,000, essentially her personal savings from before our marriage, plus her car and personal belongings. Everything else would remain mine, including the house, retirement accounts, and primary custody of our children. My client has one request, Blackwood said during our final phone conversation. She'd like to say goodbye to the children privately. Supervised visitation only, I replied, and only if she agrees to a psychological evaluation first. There was a long pause. She'll agree to those terms. The divorce was finalized on a gray December morning, in a courtroom that smelled like old wood and disappointment. Faye sat with her attorney at one table, while Jennifer Martinez and I occupied the other, the physical distance between us representing the complete destruction of 20 years of marriage. Judge Harrison reviewed the settlement agreement with the methodical attention of someone who'd seen too many families destroy themselves over money and pride. When he reached the section detailing Faye's use of marital funds to support her extramarital relationship, his expression hardened noticeably. "Mrs. Ryder," he said, looking directly at Faye, "do you understand that you're admitting to a breach of fiduciary duty regarding marital assets?" "Yes, Your Honor," she replied quietly. "And you understand that this admission could affect your credibility in any future legal proceedings?" "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Harrison signed the final decree with a flourish that felt appropriately dramatic. 20 years of marriage, reduced to a legal document that awarded me everything I'd worked for and left Faye with barely enough money to start over. As we left the courthouse, Faye approached me in the hallway. "Alex, I want you to know—" "I don't want to know anything," I interrupted. "We're done, Faye, completely and permanently." She nodded and walked away, probably heading to whatever temporary living situation she'd arranged with her remaining friends. I watched her disappear into the crowd of people navigating their own legal disasters, feeling nothing that resembled sympathy or regret. That evening, I received a call from Rebecca Voss with an update on the criminal investigation into Trent's business practices. "The IRS filed charges yesterday," she said with obvious satisfaction. "Tax evasion, failure to report income, and operating an unlicensed business. He's looking at serious prison time if he's convicted." "Where is he now?" "Nobody knows. He disappeared about a week ago, probably trying to avoid the federal agents who want to interview him. But they'll find him eventually. The IRS doesn't give up easily." The news was satisfying in a way that surprised me. I'd expected to feel vindicated when my revenge was complete, but the reality was more complex. Destroying Faye and Trent's lives had been necessary to protect my own interests, but it hadn't restored what they'd taken from me. The marriage was still over, the trust was still broken, and the years we'd spent together were still tainted by her betrayal. But at least the children were safe. The house was secure, and my financial future was protected. Sometimes that had to be enough. 2 months later, I was organizing my office files when I came across the framed copy of the postnuptial agreement I'd hung on the wall, the document that had started this entire chain of events with its hidden clause and careful wording that had ultimately saved everything I'd worked for. I took it down and read through it one more time, marveling at how a single sentence had been enough to destroy Faye's entire plan. She'd been so confident, so certain that I would sign whatever she put in front of me, that she'd never bothered to read the fine print. The irony was perfect. A woman who'd spent her career in public relations, crafting careful messages, and managing other people's reputations, had been undone by her own carelessness with language and detail. I put the document back in its frame and hung it in a place of honor, where I could see it every day as a reminder of what happened to people who underestimated Alexander Ryder. The phone rang, interrupting my reflection. Jules Brennan, calling to check on my progress. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Better than expected. The house is quiet, the kids are adjusting, and I'm starting to remember what it feels like to live without constantly watching my back." "Any word on what happened to the trainer?" "Rebecca heard he might have fled to Mexico, but the feds will catch up with him eventually. Tax evasion charges don't just disappear because you change your zip code." "And your ex-wife?" "Living with her sister, working part-time at some boutique downtown. Apparently her reputation in the PR world took a significant hit when word got out about the divorce proceedings." Jules was quiet for a moment. "You know, Alex, I've seen a lot of people go through messy divorces. Most of them come out bitter and broken, spending years trying to rebuild what they lost. But you sound almost relieved." He was right. Despite everything that had happened, despite the betrayal and the legal battles and the complete destruction of my marriage, I felt lighter than I had in years. The constant tension of living with someone who was actively working against my interests had been replaced by the peace of knowing exactly where I stood. "I spent 20 years married to someone who saw me as an obstacle to what she really wanted," I said. "Now I'm free to figure out what I actually want. without worrying about whether it conflicts with someone else's secret agenda. Any ideas what that might be? I looked around my office, at the files and equipment and evidence boards that had become my life over the past year. The investigation into Faye's affair had reminded me why I'd enjoyed practicing law, why I'd been good at uncovering truth and building cases that could withstand scrutiny. I'm thinking about getting back into legal work, I said. Maybe specializing in domestic investigations, helping other people document what's really happening in their marriages. There's definitely a market for that kind of service. And I'm good at it, better than I realized. After hanging up with Jules, I spent the evening researching the requirements for expanding my private investigation license to include domestic relations work. The process was straightforward, and my legal background would be a significant advantage in a field where most practitioners had law enforcement experience but limited understanding of family law. Within 6 months, I could be running a legitimate business, helping people protect themselves from exactly the kind of betrayal I'd experienced. The irony was appealing, using the skills I'd developed to survive Faye's deception to help other people survive similar situations. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Mr. Ryder, I got your name from Rebecca Voss. I think my husband is cheating, and I need help documenting evidence for divorce proceedings. Can we meet?" I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "I'll call you tomorrow to discuss your situation." The future was starting to take shape. A new career built on the ruins of my old life, helping other people navigate the same treacherous waters I just survived. It felt like justice, in a way, turning Faye's betrayal into something that could protect other families from similar destruction. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of wine, the same brand I'd been drinking the night Faye presented me with the postnuptial agreement. But this time, I wasn't drinking to cope with an impossible situation. I was drinking to celebrate the fact that impossible situations sometimes had solutions, if you were smart enough and patient enough to find them. The framed postnuptial agreement hung on my office wall like a trophy, a reminder that some documents were worth more than the paper they were printed on. And some people never learned that the quiet ones were usually the most dangerous opponents of all. I raised my glass in a silent toast to the future, whatever it might bring, and to the satisfaction of knowing that Alexander Ryder was nobody's fool, no matter how carefully they planned their deception. The game was over, and I had won completely.